Today we're looking at the Eldrazi domain cube. It's an oddball cube I made a long time ago that I've been updating recently. And the jumping off point is the Eldrazi spawn token. Obviously you can use it for ramp, but I wanted to kind of take a use every piece of the buffalo style approach to design where anything we can do with the token, we will do. And one of the first things I was really drawn to was using it to trigger Morbid or Revolt on command. And another mechanic that does that is evoke. When you evoke a creature, it dies eventually, but while that triggers on the stack, you can sacrifice the creature to something else, or you can tap it for an effect, or I really like the approach of giving it Undying, so you can evoke a Moldrifter, cast Undying Evil, and all of a sudden you've got a 3/3 flyer and 4 cards out of the deal. And when you evoke something, the creature does enter the battlefield, so it can trigger something like Evolve. And here the design takes kind of a left turn, where I started looking into some Elemental Tribal. Now, Elementals are a 5-color tribe with some pretty cool lords that go with it. And this kind of dragged me into a 5-color space, so then we started looking at domain cards, or Converge, or what's the other one? Sunburst. And once we were in this 5-color space, I was really drawn to the Blade Cycle from Alara Reborn as a way to do aggro. And I enable these with a ton of hybrid 1-drops that can get your multicolor requirement on board quickly. And it also opens up some kind of interesting support cards for this archetype. You have lines where you'll attack for 6 on turn 3 with kind of a junk common. And you can also just suit up a flying dragon or something. Now, already there's kind of a lot going on from the design side, and there's a lot more that I tried to put into it originally. And one of the things that I learned quickly is that it's very possible to try to do too many themes. Earlier iterations had like a Swamps Matters theme or a Top of the Library theme. And when you have too many themes, either they aren't properly supported or they start to feel parasitic. And one example is this Blade Cycle I was talking about. I had a comment from a drafter that they had Esper Stormblade in their pool, and they wanted to include it because theoretically like a 3/2 flyer for 2 mana in a not very high power environment is a pretty good rate. It's a flip Delver for 1 mana more. But they just didn't have enough multicolor permanents to make it work. And pretty much the only deck that ever did was the all-out aggro deck that had the hybrid 1-drops that had these blades. And I didn't want that. I didn't want just like the blade deck that looked the same every time. And so to fix that, I really had to crank up the multicolor density and the fixing density far beyond what I normally do in a cube. Our multicolor section is about a quarter of the cards now. And obviously a lot of the mechanics that we're trying to support only appear on monocolor cards. So the evoke creatures are monocolor, the Eldrazi spawn creators are monocolor. So we had to look for things like removal in the form of a multicolor permanent, or now there are no monocolor planeswalkers in the set, and make a ton of changes just to pump up this multicolor density so that the blades didn't feel so parasitic. And maybe I need to go even further, maybe I need to cut it entirely, but it's a work in progress there. Back on the subject of too many themes, a lot of the mechanics that we're supporting put counters in one way or another on permanents, and I wanted to open up the option to drafters to use that as a proliferate angle, and I'm not sure if I have the balance there yet. I think in a format like this, players will play Volt Charge either way, but it's possible that something like Thrumming Bird just doesn't have the density of proliferatables to be worthwhile ever. Another theme is Populate. I was really tickled by the idea of using Populate as a situational ramp mechanic because you can populate a spawn token or a scion token. And there are other tokens in the environment that you can populate, and in early designs, I even used germ tokens as like a way to use Populate to trigger Morbid. Currently, I only have Populate on like 3 cards, and it's hard for me to tell if this is adding depth and fun to the format, or if it's just kind of adding noise that is detracting from the overall design. One thing I really like about owning a cube like this is that it changes the way that you look at new set releases. You'll get really excited about cards that fit well into your environment that maybe other people don't care that much about. And one recent example is Umbral Juke, which the Edict effect is pretty situational. On some boards, you don't want to do it at all because they have something they want to die anyways. And the instant speed multicolor token, I think, is really cute. You can use it as a combat trick with the blade cycles to power them up at instant speed. You can populate it. And so it's something that like fits really well into my environment. And you guys hear that scratching at the door? What is this? I kind of love everything about this card. It's almost too perfect. Like, it feels like somebody designed it for this cube. It's a hybrid 1-drop. It is a sack outlet. It grows with +1/+1 counters. Even when you're just sacking something else, like an evoked Moldrifter or a Scion token, it doesn't have to be the one sacking it. And it can even grow in response to, like, the Annihilator trigger from your opponent. It just does a lot that I want. I'll probably run 2 of these in the format. There was a comment on our recent podcast about how can you make weird formats more readable to new drafters. And I think one of the things that you can do that is actually beneficial in a format like this is have a wider power band. And it's a bit like in retail drafts that you have some cards that are clearly first pickable. A strong first pick can kind of give your drafter a foothold and point them in a direction in a way that makes the whole environment more approachable. But one of the side effects is that it's harder to balance things. Like, I'm struggling right now with knowing what I should do with the top end of the curve. Obviously, if you open something like Kozilek, that's a pretty strong incentive to go into a heavy ramp deck. And I'm not sure if the drafter feels as incentivized if they open one of the, say, tier 1.5, tier 2 Eldrazi. But it may be that the weaker ones are more interesting to play with and against. But maybe you want it that when you play a big Eldrazi, you pretty much win as your reward to getting to the top of your curve. That said, I had a game where somebody cast Kozilek on turn 4 with 2 mana to spare. And it kind of reminds me of a design argument we had on Riptide Lab like 8 years ago about Grave Titan. And the question was, does a high-end creature need to be this strong in order for you to justify playing a 6-drop at all, or in order to justify playing a 10-drop? And that's a very context-sensitive question. For my cube at the time, the answer was yes. And it's possible that for these Eldrazi, we still want the really strong ones, but I need to test what it feels like with different targets and do a lot of testing in general. And that is what I feel is one of the exciting and challenging things about venturing off in this weird design direction, is that these questions really haven't been answered, and you give yourself, as a designer, a chance to really learn a lot, to experiment and explore with ideas. And I'm finding it more fun to update this than update my normal cube, which is in a pretty stable state. That's where I'm at currently with the design. If you have ideas for it, feel free to drop them in the comments or come visit the forums. And thank you for watching.